At 17 minutes past 8, you're very welcome back to OTB AM. We're live every morning in association with Gillette. Put your best face forward with their new and improved razors. Cian Tracy of the Irish Independent is with us this morning. Cian, good morning to you. How are you getting on?
Hey lads, I was good until I saw Owen's deep dive of Shizuoka again, and now I'm brought back there.
PTSD?
Yeah, absolutely. I was there as well, and memories coming flooding back. Yeah, as great as an occasion it was, we're still talking about Jack Carty's day there. It's kind of mad.
Yeah, and I think the point of us bringing this up is not to rain on Jack Carty. It's actually to say this wasn't his fault. It was like there was a load of other things that were going on, and it's weird that it has all been kind of hung on a few individual shoulders when really there were many. It was a nice pie of blame that everybody should have had a little slice of in the aftermath. Carty's back. That's the headline from yesterday, which he really deserves. And it is one of those kind of great Irish sports comeback stories over the last couple of years. It looks almost certain he's going to get some game time, and fairly significant game time over the course of the Six Nations.
Yeah, for sure. And like you said, he's there on merit. I think the biggest surprise perhaps is that Joey Carberry is named there. Obviously he's out injured at the moment, so he'd be obviously hard pushed to make it back to be on the bench for the Wales game. So I think Carberry's in pole position to be back up to Johnny Sexton. I think as soon as Carberry comes back and gets some decent training time under his belt, I think you'll see the lineup change there again. But yeah, like it's a great story of resilience. I think one of the things as well that kind of gets overlooked in the Jack Carty 2019 World Cup saga is that the succession planning around out half was so poor. Like Jack Carty had only made his debut for Ireland in that Six Nations, and suddenly then he was propelled. Now he did get about 7 caps maybe. World Cup warm-up games off the bench in Italy was his debut. But then to be propelled into a game against Japan, against the hosts in what was like an incredible atmosphere, he wasn't really prepared for that. So I think lessons probably have to be learned. It was similar to 2015. You remember when Ian Madigan, as well as he did when he came off the bench in the France game, in the last pool game in 2015, it came unstuck. It wasn't his fault either in a quarterfinal against Argentina. So you'd hope that lessons have been learned in terms of the succession planning. I think, we all want to see Harry Byrne come through, but you just can't pick a guy who has so few minutes under his belt. But it's clear that Andy Farrell, I think all things being equal, Andy Farrell sees his 3 out halves as Johnny Sexton, Joey Carberry and Harry Byrne. But this is, I suppose, a shot at redemption for Jack Carty. He hasn't played since Andy Farrell has taken over, which is a long time, and Andy Farrell has had a lot of time to look at him. I think Carty getting called up at the final week in November last year was really important, because while he didn't play, he got a taste for camp. He saw how things were done under Andy Farrell and Mike Catt, and went away, and you can see his performances for Connacht. So yeah, it's well deserved. And if he does get in and Johnny Sexton picks up an injury and Jack Carty goes well, it's massive for Ireland, it's massive for him. So yeah, fingers crossed he can go well now.
There's a real sign as well that if you are actually playing well, if you're doing the stuff that the coaching ticket asks you to do, we're going to pick you, as opposed to, we have the succession plan in place, we all know Harry Byrne's going to make it eventually, and we're just shooing him in. That hasn't happened in this instance, and you would have to assume that that's a really good thing for those players who are on the fringes, who are on the outside at the moment looking in thinking, I should be in there, but actually there's now a pathway. Play really well, nail down your position, be the number one in your position for your province, and we'll put you in.
Yeah, and to be fair, that was probably one of the criticisms I and a lot of other people would have had at the end of Joe Schmidt's tenure, that the team was as is, and it was very hard to break that. I think when you dig deeper into the Ireland squad, you can see the core of what Andy Farrell wants to bring to France next year at the World Cup. But there's no doubt that there are still a few places up for grabs, and you are going to have a few bolters. There's so much time left between now and next autumn. But it does send out a good message. And I think the way Ireland played last year, with the attack finally clicking and how they were trying to play, I think that's much more married up to how Connacht are playing at the moment. Now, I'm not underestimating how big the step up is from provincial to international level, not for a second. But I think the way Connacht are playing is much more in line with how Ireland are playing now. And I think when Jack Carty came into the Ireland squad in 2019, that's not how Ireland were looking to play the game. So all of a sudden Jack Carty was being asked to do things that just didn't really suit his game. So I think the stars are aligning a little bit for him for him now. I think, like I said, he's taken on board what Andy Farrell has said. And to be fair, that's exactly what you want from a coach's point of view. I think James Hume is another one who's gone away and taken the feedback. Constructive criticism is probably the way to put it. And he's got the best possible response. And that probably shows that there's a good vibe, I'd say, within the wider squad as well. Like you said, Jerry, guys feel like if they're playing well for their provinces, and obviously game time has been so limited over the last while, but they feel like now if they're playing well, that they're going to be rewarded for it.
The selection of Carberry is really interesting, because what they could have done was include Carberry with an asterisk and say when he is fit we'll add him to the squad, but in the meantime we're also bringing Harry Byrne. They didn't do that. They were like, no, when he's fit he's back in. You haven't done enough you haven't gotten your own team just yet, and it's very difficult because there's been hardly any games, but it's definitely right, everybody else needs to step up. He is our number 2, it looks like, and as soon as he's back we're going to put him in the squad. Is there any indication of when that might be?
No, we haven't really heard much, but I highly doubt that he would be brought. Ireland are going to Portugal next week for a training camp, as they would normally do before the Six Nations, and all indications are that Joey Carberry and Ian Henderson are going to be on the plane. I would imagine that he's going to be touch and go for the Wales game. I just don't see why Ireland wouldn't bring in, like you said, Harry Byrne into the squad if there was that much doubt over him. We're not privy, obviously, to that kind of information, but that would be my sense, that he's probably touch and go for Wales. But I would still fully expect Carty to be on the bench with Joey Carberry potentially coming into the mix for France the following week. It's
clear they want to spend as much time as possible with Carberry in the squad. That they've obviously had the absence because of the injuries for such a long period of time as well, that they want to just make sure that he's in every meeting, that he's in every conversation, that he's in every walkthrough, even if he's not actually picking up the rugby ball and not feeling the weight of it in his hand, but that he is legitimately implicated in all of the decision making from now up until the World Cup, really.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? We all know Johnny Sexton's injury record, and anything can happen. And yeah, it makes sense for Andy Farrell to want Carberry to be on top of the brief. I'm sure they're going to have tweaks to their attacking game plan, because, again, if we think back to 2019, that's when Ireland came unstuck, because they stood still and they didn't evolve their game plan. Teams had figured them out. So I think they definitely go into the Six Nations with a target on their back because of how well they did last year. Obviously, the win over the All Blacks. And I was kind of thinking back to the previous World Cup cycle, that dreaded word, but the year before was the 2018 when Ireland won the Grand Slam. And when you look at this squad, there's a lot of potential there. So you know what's going to happen, don't you? Ireland are going to win the Grand Slam, and then everyone's going to think we're going to win the World Cup. But
well, we were just saying we should throw this one for whatever reason. This year it's like, no, sorry, we're unavailable to win this time. Yeah,
it's interesting because you see England's approach, and they're still very much, Eddie Jones is still very much tinkering with kind of the shape up and makeup of what their squad is going to be. He's left a lot of experienced players out, whereas I think, and I'm being facetious, by the way, in saying that Ireland are going to win the Grand Slam and win the World Cup, obviously.
No, we've just clipped it up. It's already out.
Yeah. But I think you can really see the core, though, of what the squad is going to be in France. And I think over a year out from that, I think that's such a positive thing, because even I think there's a really good balance of experienced players like Sexton, Peter O'Mahony, your Keith Earls, or Conor Murray, with the younger guys who are coming through. And the younger guys who are coming through, a lot of them are they're not guys who are coming in here to make up the numbers, for want of a better term. You look at guys like Ronan Kelleher and Dan Sheehan, they are Ireland's number 1 and 2, and the battle to be first choice hooker over the next kind of 18 months is going to be incredible. Guys like Craig Casey forcing the issue. I think a guy like James Hume is really going to ask questions, and Robert Balakoon, I think, is a guy who I think he's ready to start. I think if you were picking an Ireland team in the morning to play Wales, he would certainly be in my Ireland team. So
who are you dropping?
Well, I think James Lowe's injury.
Okay.
James Lowe's injury obviously opens. Yeah, exactly. That opens up a gap. It's not a like-for-like replacement, but you can easily put Keith Earls or an Andrew Conway onto the left wing and have Robert Balakoon on the right wing. But I think he's a guy now who's ready to be unleashed. He came back from injury last week. In Ulster's win in Northampton was superb. Again, Andy Farrell is a big fan. We saw his try last summer as well. He's got he's got it all really. Like, he's superb athletic frame, top end speed, devastating footwork, and he's actually a really, really good defender as well, which kind of goes unnoticed, I think, a lot of times when we see guys like this break on the scene. So I think there's a lot to be excited about the Six Nations, but also the way the direction of the squad overall is heading.
We're due to do our depth chart for the back three next week, and I'm very interested to see what happens when you get past Hugo Keenan. He's obviously our first choice fullback. He's played brilliantly and has been absolutely sensational since he arrived, and responded really well to playing in front of a crowd as well. That's kind of, again, just bringing that up, is like, that's how quick, it's a COVID career really that we've seen from Keenan from an Ireland perspective. But what happens if he gets injured? Who is our second choice fullback? Are we looking at Conway moving back there, or is this where we actually try and get some game time for Lowry at fullback and see what that looks like?
Yeah, it's definitely one of the positions that's really up for grabs. Like, I was very surprised that Ireland didn't look at someone else, particularly in that Argentina game in November. I think at this stage, like, it's Hugo Keenan's rise has been absolutely incredible. Like, you think back to he's barely been on the scene, but since he's broken into the Ireland team, he's started every game and only been substituted twice, pretty much played 80 minutes every time. Remarkable levels of consistency. But yeah, that is an issue. Like, Ireland need to figure out who the backup is. I think when Simon Zebo came back, you would have thought that he was the obvious one. It just hasn't worked out between injury and COVID issues at Munster. Zebo has barely played this season. So yeah, they need to have a look at that. I thought it was interesting that Joey Carberry ended up getting some game time there against, I think it was Argentina as well. Last year they brought Harry Byrne on, and when you thought they were going to bring Carberry off, they actually put him back to full back. So I don't think that that's been ruled out as a potential option going forward. Now, it's very tricky because Joey Carberry is not going to be playing full back for Munster. They signed him as a 10. He's their first choice 10. So Michael Lowry is certainly one who'd come into the equation. Another guy like Jack Carty, who's there on merit, been absolutely superb for Ulster this season. Has said himself that his preferred position is out half. It's where he played in school. But I mean, from an Ulster point of view, he's going so well at full back. Why would you move him? But on Andrew Conway, I've been saying this for years that I think, and like Munster in Ireland, Munster particularly probably have missed a trick by not putting him back there. But people far more qualified than me have thought it was better to leave him on the wing. But you look how good he is in the air, how good his footwork is and stuff. So I'm surprised they haven't done that, but I don't think at this stage it's going to be a realistic option either. So that's a very long-winded way, Ger, of answering your question and saying that there are loads of contenders, but I think they really need to start having a look at that, because you can't just assume. It goes back to the point I made about the out halves, in succession planning. You can't just assume Hugo Keenan is going to be there and fit all the time. They need to start having a look as well at other options.
This could be people's first opportunity to see Mack Hansen. Will be if he plays for Ireland. Obviously he's uncapped, but for him catapulting from the Connacht stage to the Ireland stage, if he gets a game, is he in the squad to see what it's like to be in a squad, or is he in the squad to get some game time, do you think?
No, I think he's definitely in the squad to get some game time, because if you remember, he got called into the squad last November as a development player, whatever you want to call it. It wasn't quite a development player, but I think even that was a shrewd move by Andy Farrell and the Ireland coaches to do that last year, because the Wallabies, you'll remember, were touring this part of the world. I think they were in Scotland at the time, and Australia were down a lot of numbers. Mack Hansen, obviously born in Australia, so they were potentially sniffing around him to try and get him back. So I think it was really clever to, put an arm around Mack Hansen and say, look, you're our guy. We're gonna cap you. I think Ireland did something similar with Mike Haley when he came over a couple of years ago, and he won a cap in a World Cup warm-up game. So I definitely don't think he's there to make up the numbers. He's obviously been out for the last few weeks, so I think that made his selection not surprising, but I think he's done well to get in there, considering he hasn't played any game time, and it's a big step up. I think he's been devastating with ball in hand. I mean, just like, he's become a real crowd favourite at the sports ground, but I think he's got work to do on his defence, which probably seems to be a bit of a common theme with wingers breaking into the Ireland team. You think of Jacob Stockdale, James Lowe, Mack Hansen probably fits into the same kind of mould in that super going forward, but has a few, I would say, things to iron out defensively.
It's obviously very hard to be a defender on the wing. because they get exposed quite a lot. Like, it's just difficult because, you know, you tend to be one-on-one with very, very fast, creative players. Like, it's tough.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, Owen, actually. Yeah, there might be a bit of crack between Dan Sheehan now and Mack Hansen now that they're in the same squad, because, I mean, as a winger, I know Dan Sheehan is ridiculous, like footwork, pace, power, but as a winger, you don't want to get done by a hooker out wide like that.
Cian, do you reckon that, like, it felt that maybe like there were bigger problems than this, but at the end of the 2018 Six Nations, it felt that people could almost name the Ireland squad blindfolded. They'd be able to tell you exactly who Schmidt's 15 was. Granted, there are like 5 big games to play, and God forbid Ireland win a Grand Slam. That would be terrible, obviously. Ireland would probably have a fair idea of who their best 15 are. But it does feel that if we're jumping to conclusions a little bit on this squad, there are a number of positions here that are still very much up for grabs, or at least the backup positions, which is there's a healthier conversation around that, and there's a healthier level of mystery around some of those positions than there was maybe 4 years ago.
Yeah, for sure, Owen. Like, it goes back to my point that, like, Ireland did become predictable. They came predictable in how they were playing, but they came predictable in their team selection as well. I think it was George Ford probably hit the nail on the head. I think it was in 2019 when he said, you know, if Ireland shut down Johnny Sexton, or if opposition teams shut down Johnny Sexton, you shut down Ireland. And that's the way teams were looking at them now. The question is, like, are Ireland still in the same point? Are they still overly reliant on Johnny Sexton? I would still say that the gap between Johnny Sexton and Joey Carberry or Jack Carty is still significant, but I think crucially there are much more strings to Ireland's bow than there were in 2019. I think in 2018 was different, but I think when you have forwards and a front row like Andrew Porter, Ronan Kelleher and Tadhg Furlong, and a back row of Jack Conan, Josh van der Fleer and Caelan Doris, that allows you to do so many different things. Every one of the pack, I think, that starts in the Six Nations is going to be totally comfortable on the ball. That might not have been the case at stages in 2019. I think Gary Ringrose is even looking far more comfortable on the ball too in the last kind of 18 months, and he's been pushed on by James Hume too. So there is that healthy competition within the squad, but I also think crucially the game plan has evolved, and that's why it's so important now that they still find, like, that it's still an evolution, that there isn't a kind of an acceptance, okay, that, you know, Ireland beat the All Blacks last year, and that's it now, they've figured it out. Like, teams are going to, like I said, Ireland are going to have a target on their back. The amount of hours they'll spend pouring over the footage. So it's about Ireland continuing to add subtle tweaks, and I've no doubt that they're going to do that, to be honest. I think there's a real inherent understanding that was one of the good things about Andy Farrell taking on the job. Like, he had a front row seat for what went wrong in 2019, and he's a smart guy. I think he'll have said, okay, we can't make the same mistakes twice. And I think all indications are, like I was one of the ones as well who were really heavily critical of Mike Catt's game plan over the last couple of years, but we've seen it really come to fruition now, and the players look far more comfortable in what they're being asked to do as well. And like I said, when you look at the athletic profile of the pack, and even the guys that are coming in behind them, like a Ryan Baird, there's every reason to be optimistic about the direction. Without getting ahead of ourselves, there's every reason to be optimistic.
We should talk about the news that's come out in the last 24 hours or so that Jason Jenkins might be moving from Munster to Leinster. This was obviously a stick that was used to beat Munster with when he signed, that he was an opportunity blocker for some of the younger players. Presumably the same applies in Leinster. Like, you know, it doesn't seem that different, a situation where we're taking somebody from South Africa, essentially. The fact he's coming from Munster is neither here nor there. Like, do Leinster really not have young players who might be able to fill this role?
Yeah, like, I'm not going to be hypocritical and sit here and say, oh yeah, you know, it's all grand for Leinster to sign him, when I was critical of Munster signing him for a few different reasons. Now, Munster fans will say that, oh, like, he hasn't blocked anyone, but the reason he hasn't blocked anyone primarily is the guy has played 18 minutes since he's arrived. Like, he's been, in that regard, he's been a disastrous signing when you look at the return on investment that Munster have gotten. So, yeah, Leinster do have players coming through their system. That's the surprising thing. Now, it's no secret that Leinster have been looking for a big, powerful lock for the last, I would say, 12 months, particularly since the defeat to La Rochelle. For all that they have, they do believe that they have a power deficit there. Now, you have a guy like Jack Dunn, who is, I think, 118 kg, 6'7" maybe. coming through their system, who was really good at Irish under-20s level, and like as a country we don't produce guys of that pure mass. So the talk is that he's going to go to Exeter. Now Leo Cullen is obviously a very good judge of a lock, having played there so long himself, but I'm a bit surprised that they haven't taken more of a look at him. Another guy, Charlie Ryan, is coming through their academy. He captained Ireland to the Ireland under-20s to a Grand Slam in 2019, but we've barely seen him at all either. So look, obviously Leinster are making judgments behind the scenes, but like, I'm surprised they're not going for, without being disrespectful, I would say Jason Jenkins, and like they were linked with Chris Vui as well, who's the Bristol lock, plays for Samoa. I would say they're the second tier of like elite second rows. I would have thought if Leinster are going out signing someone, it needs to be like on a Scott Fardy level, or you know, that literally the tier above, like an Eben Estebet or some guys like that. Now, easier said than done to get these guys, particularly in so close to a World Cup, but obviously that's the market that they're shopping in. All indications are that Jenkins is a super player, but like Munster certainly haven't seen it at all. Like, the poor guy's been cursed with injury, so it's a risk
It's a big risk to sign somebody with an injury profile like this. Is a big risk, and that, I think, is the other side. Apart from, okay, so the success of Leinster's big signings in the pack, you all the way back to Rocky Elsom, Brad Thorne. You would say Scott Fardy was a success over the period of time, and it didn't really prevent the best young players coming through in that. You know, you would maybe argue that he helped the second row players coming through, James Ryan, and even the back row when he would play in the back row, that it wasn't like he was blocking the emergence of any of those world-class back rowers that we've seen from Leinster over the period of time. So maybe the squad's makeup is slightly different. It's like, I don't really think Dialende stopped the backs in Munster from progressing. It was like, here's a world-class talent you're injecting into training every day, and you can see the benefit of that in the long run. But signing one of these players who's in that tier where it's like, is he that much better than Jack Dunn, for example? Is he really that much better that we're allowing a good young Irish talent to go to England and then saying, okay, we're going to take this injury-prone player and hopefully get some game time out of him?
It's a very un-Leinster thing to do as well, because they're normally, like, they've obviously had a couple of duds along the way, everyone has, but like, they're normally like so astute when they do bring overseas players in. And you mentioned the calibre of guys that they brought in, but all of those guys were established internationals. Like, I don't think anyone has an issue. Like, there was no one saying that RG Snyman or Damien Dialende or Reicher are blocking young talent, because they're elite players and like players can learn at them. Like, Jason Jenkins has been a bit of a journeyman, probably. Like, you know, he played a bit in Japan. He's come to Munster. He only signed a 1-year deal with Munster. So yeah, if it comes to pass, I think it'll be interesting. And you know what I was also thinking as well is, you remember Victor Matfield last week or the week before kind of gave us a bit of a, you know, told tales of a conversation he had with Johan van Gran behind the scenes, and one of the lines that stood out was, all the good players go to Leinster. And maybe, you know, I was kind of thinking maybe it was lost in translation a bit, but now I'm starting to think that maybe that's what he was referring to, that Munster were going to lose. Now, he was only on a 1-year deal, but that Leinster were going to snap up Jason Jenkins, because I think Van Gran was probably hopeful that he would go to Bath with him. So look, it's like, I think it's a strange signing. I don't understand it. I thought it was Munster, when Munster were signing Jason Jenkins, I thought it was a strange signing. The thing is, if you talk to anyone in South Africa, they'll tell you that this guy is a super, super talent. But I mean, you can only judge off what you've seen, and we haven't seen it. And
maybe they've got him at a discount because of the injury situation, and this time next year he's played all the big games in the Champions Cup and kept Ryan Baird out of the team, and we're like, what's going on here? Why is Ryan Baird not getting some game time?
And that would be a fair enough gripe if that happens. Like, we're talking about Ryan Baird as one of the next guys in this like super athletic, you know, Ireland pack. So it's very interesting. It's very, very interesting, especially not having had a proper look at someone like Jack Dunn.
Yeah, maybe Jack Dunn going to Exeter is going to be great for his career. If he can get in that Exeter team, like, that's a brilliant setup for him to be going to between the ages of 23 and 24, 25, 26, and then you get him back, hopefully, and he becomes a number one. So obviously bigger brains than ours, us mere mortals, are working away in the background of this. Cian, good stuff. Thanks a million. Delighted you put your nailed your colour to the mast. It's a Grand Slam for Ireland.
I hope that's not live.
8:42. That's Cian Tracy, the Irish Independent, giving us his thoughts this morning. You can give us your thoughts too. Philip Nolan says, fair play to Owen for suffering through watching that game again. Great analysis in that sense. He did it. Yeah, great analysis in that sense. You showed up. Exactly. Well done.
After battle, the best ability is availability.
David Wall says, fair play. Carty got totally pushed under the bus. We don't trust a creative player who plays every game and is a captain, while we talk so much about 10s who aren't even second choice at URC level. We have a very weird relationship with 10 in Irish rugby all the way back to like before my time. It just seems to be the thing that we get obsessed about for whatever reason.
Every country does, I'm sure.
Well, we like our messiahs, don't we?
Yeah. And the 10 is the messiah. He's got all the power.
Well, if you invest everything in a messiah, you don't have to do any work yourself. Do you know? And then you invest all of your hopes and dreams, and then they let you down. You have a scapegoat, as opposed to, well, what could I have done to fix the situation? You know, my tiny little bit of this. I'm not talking about like us influencing the Ireland situation, but like maybe, you know, talking about grassroots and squad development and widening the game, all the stuff that isn't like, well, who's the 10?
Yeah.
FJ on YouTube says, I can't put my finger on why I think Carty is a talented handicapper rather than a Group 1 horse. Maybe I'm wrong. Hopefully he gets the chance to prove me wrong. Hopefully he gets the chance to play in a big game with the first choice Ireland pack in front of him and the first choice Ireland centres behind him, and it's like he steps up, because there's a good possibility that we're going to see 2 or 3 years of the peak of his career coming now, where he's had that comeback. Like I think we really underrate the resilience that is required from professional sports people to come back from setbacks. And when they've done that, they are a different animal. They're a completely different beast. And so that's what I'm really looking forward to. Jack Carty's got the nod. He's fought through everything. He's constantly living with the pressure of being one of the most spoken about players in Irish rugby, and now he's getting his chance. Fair play to him.
Yeah, like the knock-on impact of this is interesting as well, or the selections of 10, and listening to Cian there talk about what Ireland are thinking with Joey Carberry is fascinating. That, like, is he potentially to pack up at 15? Like, you would think that if we believe the IRFU level of control exists in this country, then Munster might have been strong-armed into playing Joey Carberry at 15 at some point.
Let's wait and see who gets the gig.
But then again, like, they've got Mike Haley absolutely flying at the moment, who's having a brilliant season and was brilliant last weekend for Munster. So they've looked around at their options and said, we don't need you at 15.